Just as a reminder, this is recorded. This is or September 12th. Many of the active participants are missing here from today's meeting, including from our side. People working on cluster registry are currently not dialed in. So from the Google side, there's not much of an update for the SIG. And I think we skipped last week's get together for app admin and cluster admin. So unless anybody out there has a specific topic, I can give an update on testing.
As a side note, I just created an entry in the meeting notes, so please feel free to update attendance and other information. And I'll start writing down what we're talking about in a second.
So since I don't hear the clamor to bring up any outstanding issues, the one that affects the SIG right now, related to the 1.8 release, is just the status of testing. So since at least Paul and Ryan, I think, are not privy to, may not be privy to how we test in Federation, I'll just go over it. So we have a submit queue job that runs against every PR that's tested. And the way we test is once a day we recycle clusters. What that means is we bring up 3 clusters, and that's at 8 a.m. And we bring up those clusters at the current state of head at 8 a.m. Now for the next 24 hours, we take whatever's checked into head, build a control plane, the Federation control plane from head, and test from there. So the upside, and actually I shouldn't call it an upside, why that is necessary is bringing up a cluster on GKE takes between 10 and 15 minutes. So 3 clusters takes up to 45 minutes, plus testing. That would bring us over around 70 to 75 minutes to have one run of Federation testing. So that's why we have to bring up the clusters as a separate operation. The downside is that if something slips in and essentially breaks Federation, Federation will only see it 1 day later. And when Federation sees it, it blocks the entire submit queue. We have to track down who and why they broke it, tell them that they're blocking the submit queue indirectly. And once they're able to get their fix in, we do what's called the redeploy operation. So we rebuild our clusters using the latest head and redeploy them, and on those, that's how we kickstart the process again. So that's why we blocked the queue yesterday for probably about 20 hours. So for a lot of people outside the group who don't know how this works, we get a lot of the blame. So I'm not going to get into. We have had a separate discussion on how to address this. We can get into that again at a future time. But right now, unless somebody wants to step up and own the whole process and change the whole process, that's how we're doing things. And we have again, I'll tell this for Paul here. We have a build documentation.
I have an update here.
Okay, go ahead.
I was doing that migration of this deployment to KubeADM based deployment. Most of the things are ready, and yesterday I got much of commits done in test infra. There is still KubeADM doesn't support cloud provider yet, but we needed in Federation, we need to have a cloud provider support in that. So I've done implementing it, so I just need to push it. So probably we are just a week away into migrating towards KubeADM based deployment. Currently, the 3 cluster bring up takes around less than 5 minutes for me right now.
Okay.
So probably
excellent.
we can migrate to that as soon as possible, probably by next week.
Can you just summarize what that is for other people on the call?
Sure. So actually, so currently we bring up the individual KTS clusters using cluster kubeapp.sh right now. So that's going to be phased out. And so we had a plan to migrate to KTS anywhere based deployment, that is kubeadm. While moving that, like, okay, we are trying to do bring up the clusters parallelly. So that particular part is implemented right now. The other missing block is the kubeadm need to support the cloud provider support for the KTS cluster. That was not there. So I'm trying to add that. Okay. Once we are complete with this, like the cluster kubeapp.sh part will be removed, and we are moving towards the kubeadm based deployment. And above that, again, federations will all run as same as currently. We plan to bring down the uptime of this KTS clusters drastically. So we can, in every PR job, most probably we can bring up the clusters, do the tests, and tear down them. So we don't have to rely on this recycling the clusters every day, most probably. Yeah.
So until that lands, is there a reason to continue blocking the submit queue?
No, definitely not.
If we don't block the submit queue, though.
So in a few instances, we were the only ones to catch the bugs. Right.
It seems to me, though, it happens a lot more often that it's like quota or infrastructure issues rather than problems. And problems can always be caught after the fact with a periodic job, right? It's not that we won't find problems, we just won't block the submit queue while we're fixing them.
But if things are broken, right?
I mean, the merge rate's super low right now, right? We're in code freeze. The number of things that are going to slip in, the rate of change is going to be extremely low, except that the things that are going in are extremely critical because we're trying to drive towards stability so we can release something.
So can I ask a question as someone new in this group? When we find problems, are they problems in Federation or are they problems in Kubernetes?
There are problems in Kubernetes. Right now, there's very little to no activity in Federation.
Okay.
Is it problems, though, with dependencies Federation could have on Kubernetes?
No.
Okay.
So we're finding legitimate Kubernetes bugs, right?
Correct.
And that's why it blocks the submit.
Well, that's not the only reason things break, though.
I'm saying that's why the Federation job is allowed to block the submit queue, right?
So typically what will happen is, so Federation will block the submit queue. We will find the group or persons responsible for blocking it. They will submit the fix that fixes the issue, but then they're still dependent on us to still have to wait for us to rebuild the clusters and redeploy them to unblock the submit queue. And that's the painful part that I think Maru is underlining.
Yeah, and so the kubeadm change will make this less painful because it will allow us to not have to recycle these clusters on a daily basis and get fresh ones for new pulls, right?
Right. We'll be testing head on head instead of head on 20 hours ago.
But I mean, when we're out of tree, are we still going to be blocking the submit queue?
That was my follow-up question. How does this change when we're out of tree?
I mean, out of tree just means that test infra, or whatever that test infra job tests, is going to start pulling and building from out of tree.
How do other things out of tree? Is there a precedent for other things out of tree blocking the submit queue today?
Not that
Cops.
Cops, yeah.
But realistically, I mean, one of the goals of getting out of the tree is that we can separate ourselves from Kube's release cadence and ensure compatibility on a lag, which doesn't, to me, imply blocking the submit queue. We would detect when there are problems and we'd feed that information back.
Yeah.
We'd have to be able to do it quickly enough so that we don't get too behind, but we wouldn't block the submit queue.
Yeah, I'm with Maru on that.
that's
It seems
kind
like
of
if we had the, I'm sorry, go ahead. I will stop talking
No,
and
no.
this sentence.
I don't have the longest history in this group, but from my perspective, when I initially joined, one of the main issues was that, yeah, we were decoupled in that we weren't blocking the submit queue. Stuff started breaking and nobody cared or noticed for months at a time. So we can go back to that. But
I think that's a good place to go in terms of discussion. So when we are out of tree, we'll have a test job for Kubernetes Federation, and that should find the same problems as the job that currently exists, right? In theory, anyway.
yes, the difference being you gate K/K commutes or not.
I mean, this is a general
ideally-
problem. This isn't like we're the only ones that are going to hit this. Everybody who's out
Yeah.
of tree is going
And
to
we're
have
moving
to
it.
develop process for identifying breaking changes in Kubernetes and feeding that back through and making sure it gets resolved in a timely manner.
It's actually going to happen in other interesting ways too. I've been talking to Brian about feature branches that he wants to start employing in January for all master work. So that, in this case, if something breaks what you're doing, or if you happen to notice that something's broken, but it isn't detected inside of core per se, there's going to have to be a feedback loop to let people know.
Yeah.
And over time, we should have enough tests in core Kubernetes itself that this should be detected there. Like right now, we in Federation test, we are finding Kubernetes bugs. These should be just core Kubernetes tests, and they should be finding these bugs.
So for the people that have been triaging these and diagnosing them, when we have found Kubernetes, are there like usual suspects that tend to break? We could maybe go from by adding integration tests in Kubernetes.
Sorry, you broke up quite a bit there. Did you just ask whether there was the same usual suspects when we identify breakage?
Yeah, and I wondered if we could fill gaps in the Kubernetes EDEs or integration tests to avoid having to block the submit queue on Federation.
So SIG apps, I think, is a prime candidate for most breakage, and they are actively working to migrate both unit and need-to-eat integration to provide better and more effective test coverage. So that's already in process on their side.
I would say there have been breakages across many SIGs. Like last time it was SIGAuth where there was an RBAC change. This time it's kubelet. And like you said, it's been apps. Networking has broken a lot. Yeah. So we've actually seen it across the board.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm wondering to myself is, assume that we take the job that runs in the submit queue now and can break submit queue. If we run that same job multiple times a day in Kubernetes Federation at some point in the future, do we still need to have the coverage in the submit queue for that we have now for Federation? Or is it the kind of thing that, like, if say you take Federation, you add feature branches, you add other integrations that are outside the core, and assume that you can't gate on all of those things in the core, and that there has to be a feedback loop. Is the feedback loop, though it might be less immediate than blocking the submit queue, is it sufficient?
So the job you're hinting at already exists. It's called the CI tests. It runs every 45 minutes or so, and that is a head-on-head test. So it's something to look at for whoever's on build comp rotation. The feedback loop would have to be making sure that we have a set of eyes looking on it and sending an email or filing an issue appropriately. It's still a lot of work to figure out what's going on. Like yesterday, I would say it took about an hour and a half, 2 hours to route to the right SIG. So I don't know. I see like submit queue right now in its current state as we're providing a service to the community and helping them diagnose issues. The downside is we look like the SIG that's always broken, and we kind of don't get kudos for any of it.
You get some kudos. let's pull that back.
Really?
Yeah, you do. It doesn't feel like it, but it's there.
Okay, but so whoever's on, I'll change this. Let's say whoever's on build cop rotation is a significant amount of time for, and then we block the submit queue. So if there's agreement, let me just try to summarize this. So if there's agreement that we keep dedicating a build cop person, they look at the CI tests and route the issues, and we remove ourselves from submit queue. Then we don't block the community, and we still voluntarily have someone looking at issues for the community and routing them.
That seems to be what we're all tiptoeing around or dancing around.
Okay. So I'll take that as an action item. Follow up with mostly it's going to be test infra. So probably a single test infra commit to remove ourselves from submit queue blocking with an explanation to probably Kubernetes dev. So
that will enhance, in all likelihood, that seems like if you get the same feedback loop, you will get more kudos and less haters doing what they do.
I care a lot less about the kudos and the haters. I think I don't see a lot of haters. I see a lot of like help. But that said, it is a lot of time and effort. A lot of this conversation is predicated on the idea that we're not making a lot of changes to this code base right now in Federation. And so once we start doing that, then suddenly this situation changes. So I think this, again, falls back to the idea that we need to get things out of core before we can turn on the testing infrastructure again, really in something with teeth.
What kind of?
We're not going to block anything. It's easy to not block anything when you know you're not making changes. But there's been a lot of plans and suggestions too that we start pushing things to GA very quickly, and that we also, add a lot more features. We can't do that and then turn off the testing at the same time. It took a lot of effort to get to the point where even this level of green was achievable. And once we turn that off and then we start coding again, things are going to rot.
Well, so we need to think about what the right testing strategy is, though. Once we begin making more frequent changes, so one option is that we could fix testing the core to be on a fixed version of Federation, and have another set of tests that test Federation head on Kubernetes head.
Right. So this is a conversation that we had a long time too, which is good. I'm glad that great minds think alike, and so do ours. We've always been kind of asking ourselves that, the way Federation sits on top of core or on top of a bunch of interfaces, does it make sense to, during most of the development, sort of snapshot a stable version of the early release? Because otherwise, we're sitting on top of bugs that get fixed very quickly.
Yeah.
A lot of this conversation in my mind, though, these are great questions to have once it's out of core.
Yes.
And I think the point I'm bringing up is we can't be doing active development in core because with the queue off, because then we're just going to be shooting ourselves in the foot all over again.
Yeah. So I think, let me know if you agree with me, Michael Rubin, it seems like the priority ought to be that any changes to Federation in the core must be in service of moving it out of the core.
Yes.
And that we basically need to freeze Federation as it is in the core while we move it out.
Yes.
Otherwise.
That is my belief. Does that make sense to folks in the SIG? Maru, does that make sense to you too?
Sure.
I think that's in line with what I remember from the move plan.
Yeah.
Too.
I think it's in line with our plan, but I think we also kind of have things on the edge sometimes that we talk about. I think if you look at the features repo, it also doesn't fully reflect this. So I just want to make sure that we're in agreement. Is Shashid here?
Yeah.
Like, what do you think about that? Because I know that there's items on your plate.
Hey, Rubin, I think there's a lot of disturbance. Hello?
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
Shashi, the question, the question is that do you agree with this that currently any activity
Sure, I
on
think
Federation?
I understood. I followed a little bit. We should be removing it from a submit queue, but yeah, it has its own challenges. So I think test infra side, I think it should not be a big deal moving towards a new way. But we need to think more about the out of core moving out the code part actually. So testing part can be taken care, I believe. So I think the more urgent issue would be the code move out. So I think we can concentrate our discussion there. Should be good. Yeah.
Okay. Just want to make sure that we're in line.
Yes, and I just wanted to conclude the discussion. What I was getting is that currently what Shashi is doing, he is actually working on trying to remove that dependency that we need to spin up clusters every morning, and then there is a delay between actual the catching the problem actually, right? So whatever changes he is doing, once they are complete, we would be able to catch the problem on the particular commit or PR which is causing the problem, be it in Federation or Kubernetes, right?
Correct.
So it really doesn't matter if we do it now or later, given it's only in test infra and these test changes. Until that is done, we can remove the pre-submits as blocking as of now, right? As you suggested, Christian, right?
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So that can be the conclusion.
So removing pre-submits is blocking. We're not going to be doing active development for Federation except to remove it out of core. And then once we have it out of core, we need to revisit how we're going to continue testing the development for Federation and feed information back to core when things are broken.
So your point too about doing no development right now, I'm not sure that's shared by everybody.
That's what I'm trying to bring up. So I'm not saying that as like mandate. I'm trying to make sure that we all agree. And it sounds like we don't. Maybe we don't. I don't know.
It's just there's a test plan, and I'm not familiar with all the details.
Yeah, so can we move to that moving out of core discussion now? Like I did circulate a small plan. I mean, I don't know if it is complete in any way, but I was expecting some feedback on that. So there I did try to put in a simple set of steps which can actually facilitate this correctly. Because it would be quite unlikely that we halt the complete development altogether for, say, a couple of weeks or a month. I'm not sure how long is it going to take.
How about I present the notes doc and pull up these things as we talk about
Yep.
too, which may be helpful. Gotcha. All right. So we get this, and this is the document that you're referring to? Move Federation out of core?
Correct. Yes.
And this, by the way,
the main thing I did
notes. Sorry, just as a quick side note. So this is what I've been putting in notes. If you guys think I'm missing something or I'm misrepresenting something, please go in and fix it.
Sure, sure. So I believe most of the people in this room might have gone through this doc. Do you want me to just list it again, or I mean, speak about it again, or it just have some basic steps about the migration step that was sort of suggested by Maru in one of his comments, the initial comments, and then a couple of which need to be probably done. I might be missing something, so if somebody is missing, they can give a feedback on that. Yep.
I think the challenge is Madhu's not here, and Madhu's the one who's done most of the reviewing so far. Maybe if there's other folks who had questions or comments, I'm just not sure we'll be able to fully close this.
Maru's here.
I mentioned that Maru suggested this, the strategy which I have listed over there. And Madhu also is quite aware of all these things, and he also has some background about how we should do it, given he has, and Jonathan has done that for cluster registry, means at least the initiation.
I was wondering what's the timeline you're expecting? Is it a few weeks, month, quarter?
I believe it should not be more than a month.
Okay.
As far as getting it reviewed and signed off, or
Yes,
end-to-end
yes.
everything done?
Reviewed and signed off. There would be items, for example, some tooling or some tests and all, which might remain. But I think we would be able to move the development over here. Maru, you were saying something. Maybe he has a different view.
No, I don't have a different view on that. I think one of the outstanding issues for me is kubectl currently has Federation-specific stuff. Is kubectl out of tree now? It's still in core, isn't it?
It is still in core, yes.
So if it's going to be like,
yeah,
how is that
there
API
are some-
stuff that's in Federation today and in the same repo, we're just going to maintain a copy? And how do we maintain that? Or do we just deprecate that and do something else? That's a pretty big issue, I think.
See, right now most of the API is what we are replicating, right? So for some time, at least we'll have to go and do that. Because moving or migrating the API would be a big chunk of work. I don't think we can take it up front.
When you say migrating the API, what do you mean?
Means, for example, having its own API, because that discussion is, in which way is unconcluded, right?
Right. No, I get that. I'm just saying that, like, if kubectl today knows what to do with like a Federation cluster object, because
it does
know. Tree, what's the plan for when we move this out of tree, maintaining that support or deprecating that support in kubectl?
I remember there was some discussion about having it as plugin or something, because it's very small portion of code that is just like one command.
I'm not saying it's a lot. It's just that, do we maintain compatibility? And if so, how do we do that? Because as far as I know, there isn't. I don't know, maybe Paul, you can, is there any mechanism in kubectl for extension?
Yeah, there's a plugin mechanism that, if I remember correctly, is similar to how Git plugins work, where you can put plugin binaries into a particular directory, and you name them a certain way, and if kubectl doesn't recognize a command, it will look in that directory to find an extension, and if it finds one, it'll exec that if it finds one that matches the command. And also, in another factor that might affect this discussion is that kubectl's generic describer and listers and just generic resource support has gotten like much better in the last 6 months, 8 months.
So how would that? I mean, it sounds like, we need some way of communicating that or documenting that. I mean, the plugin model, we have to provide that plugin, get people to install it, etc. And then the other model, like, how does this work? Can I still do kubectl get clusters and it will know what to do if it's hitting the endpoint? But
so if the now here's where my ignorance and gaps on my knowledge in this area still show. So if you have kubectl talking to the aggregator and it can reach, it knows about the API group, like the API group with the resource that you want to use is registered, you can just say kubectl get one from service catalog as service instances. And it will, if it knows about the service catalog API group, knows how to contact that API server and get the instance.
But that's only if the aggregator's in play? Like the aggregator has a registration mechanism, so it knows where to forward requests. But if we're not using the aggregator, do we benefit from that behavior?
So maybe some more information would be helpful for me to answer this question correctly. Is the resource that we're talking about, what API group is it in?
So it's a special Federation group version. And from what I know of the kubectl code, I think it doesn't matter that whether it's an aggregator returning the information or just the Federation API server directly, as long as the correct information about what all group versions and what all resources are exposed by the server are returned. So in our case,
I think that jives with my own understanding.
Awesome, yeah. So get cluster should work, but I don't think there's enough implementation yet about describe specifically. So I don't expect describe to work. So to specifically answer Baru's question that like, yes, we should have a plan for like how would we have Federation specific kubectl code. We would need it until kubectl becomes truly generic. And I think we'll only need dependency on our Federation API types. So maybe we put that out separately and then code would depend on that like types.go.
So generic describe is pretty darn good these days. It'll build a description for you based on the fields in the response that it gets. Will that work?
But how do you know
I'll have to
what
check
API
again.
to hit? I mean, if I'm saying I want clusters and I'm just hitting a Federation endpoint, how does kubectl know what URL is going to hit the cluster like REST API?
So what I understand is that a
parsing
given
that.
API. Okay. What I understand.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I can answer that. So given API server could have a group of APIs exposed or not exposed. So it basically just checks. I think there is a discovery mechanism or something which is checks if this
there's a
API
discovery
is
API.
existing or not.
Yes.
Yep. So
So it
using
doesn't
that,
worry
it
about things like beta 1, alpha 1.
I don't think
like,
so. I don't.
It includes all that stuff, and when you put in a resource name into kubectl, you can put in different levels of quality. But you can actually use a partially qualified group version kind. Like you can say the version and the kind, but omit the group, or you can fully qualify it, or you can not qualify it at all, and kubectl will like search the space of group kind versions that it knows about. And in the event that there's a conflict between one of them, have the same resource name in two different groups, it'll say, well, actually it depends on what the two different groups are, but there is some kind of ambiguity that will give you an error.
Yeah, if our source name is only exposed in one group version, it will be able to find the group version.
well, that's promising.
Yeah, and if it's exposed in two, you need to partially qualify the resource name.
Okay. I mean, it sounds like it should be possible to have kubectl work without even having to depend on Federation-specific like code, which I think that's good.
Actually, last time I checked, it wasn't as generic enough. I know like SIG CLI was working on it. So I think in the meantime, we still might require custom code, but we can check with SIG CLI what's the current status.
So one experiment that we could do is we could go and find any code in kubectl that is linked to Federation, comment it out, build the binary, point it at the API, and see if it still works right.
Yep.
I mean, this is how it works, right? Start removing dependencies and see what explodes.
Yeah.
It's actually kind of fun. I like it like the same way I like to like organize my sock drawer.
So hopefully the outcome of that discussion is an action item in this plan that includes
Yes. That's
clarifying.
what I was going to say. So I'll add that also. It was missing from here. Thanks, Maru, for pointing that out. In terms of status, I have started working on this. I started working on this last weekend. So so far I have been able to set up a repo with needed commits and all that according to whatever I have listed. And I am in the process of having the particular binaries built out. And without really moving any code around and rendering most of the code from Kubernetes. I was facing some difficulties over there. I mean, some things were not straightforward over there. So if anybody has some background on rendering Kubernetes code, which also includes some packages which are very similar to what are there right now inside Kubernetes, it might be of help to me. means doing it the right way or whatever. Otherwise, I would be able to figure that out. In any case.
Yeah, so I started looking at Ingress code as well, and Ingress also has similar stuff that it renders some parts of core Kubernetes. It uses like the cloud provider logic. So we can look at that repository to see what they've done.
Okay. I looked at repos like API Machinery, API, and some other similar repos which have moved recently, which vendors some portions of K-test. But Federation was like, it vendors quite a large portion. And plus, right now, the first step, what we are doing, trying to do is that we move the code out, but don't use it. Like we move all the packages out, but still try to use the packages from the K-test KK repo itself, right? So that if there is any development which is needed, can continue over there. So doing that way, I don't know. I mean, you can suggest that that might not be the right way of going forward. If that is not the right way, I think things are simpler for us.
Yeah, another alternative that was suggested was like we don't do feature work while we are making this move. So then when we are moving, like we move those packages out of core repository, and then once it's done, then we start iterating on those new features in the new repository.
I think we have to do it that way. Like, this is why I'm confused. Is that still a question?
Yeah.
Like, I think it'd be really hard not to do it that way.
I don't know, just because from what is it, a cluster app admin group, the ongoing discussions, is there any plan? I mean, what is the plan? Is it to predicate the move out of core to any further development? I guess Maru.
I mean, for me, a lot of the work is just getting machinery in place. I don't really think it's dependent on development not being present. There just has to be a freeze during the cutover. But like getting all the build infrastructure in place and getting sort of the procedure for doing it, I mean, ideally, you're going to have to do repetitive copies anyway. So what's the harm in allowing people to still merge stuff until you're ready to actually cut over for real?
I guess my only question is, if we're going to be doing that and we turn off the testing, how do we know if they're merging stuff and
we're not turning off the testing, we're just not blocking stuff. So we find out when stuff's merged, oh, you broke something.
Okay, yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
you're right. No, I'm wrong. I'm sorry. I just worry. I just worry that when we weren't blocking, it was hard to keep us focused. But I'm also remembering back in the days before we had build comp rotations, and we've got those now. So I apologize. That makes sense.
But I do see that it'll add some complexity to whoever is moving the code. Like if the source itself keeps changing, there's additional work required. So I don't know how much development are you planning? Like, is it?
I'm not saying we're planning development. I'm just saying, for me, when I'm doing any sort of migration, like whether it be out of tree or even within the tree, my general practice is, doing test runs before I do it for real, so that I get, a degree of, like, I'm not screwing something up. I'm doing a straight copy, and then I'm manipulating it and getting to the state I want, and then I'll do it again to make sure that I'm not missing anything. Does that make sense? Because, I mean, if you don't do that and you get to the state where, oh, things are broken and people can't work, like, that's kind of like, why risk that? This way we allow people to merge stuff, even if it's just fixes. Like if something goes in, it reveals that we're doing something wrong and we got to fix something. We don't want to block legitimate work because we're still in the process of completing the move out of tree.
Yeah, it again depends on scope of that change. If you're doing like bug fixes, that's fine. If you're like doing huge refactors.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what I was thinking too.
Refactors. That's
right. I mean, if we're adding stateful, like to me, I look at stateful sets as like a big deal. Yeah, and would involve a lot of work. But I mean, if you're talking,
we're not merging anything that's not critical, right?
No. So I'm thinking post code freeze at this point.
Oh, okay.
That's, I'm not.
We're not doing any significant work until.
Yeah, code freeze is going to be,
for sure.
That's just a few weeks away, and then that's over. So I'm thinking like past that.
I mean, I don't know. I'm hoping we can do a push and at least, I don't know. I was hoping we were actually going to be in a position to reopen with everybody else, but I guess maybe I'm not sure that's realistic, but that would be the goal. So, mainly because then we're frozen until then, and that's just kind of a natural thing.
Yeah, I sort of kind of support this, what Maru is saying. On the other hand, about features, Maru, you can tell about if Red Hat has some features in app admin or that area which they are thinking of. But Huawei side, we had 3 features which were sort of in the pipeline. Stateful sets, as you said, Mike Rubin, that is sort of put on lower priority, and nobody is actually working on that. And we'll start work on that only after it is moved out of core.
Okay.
There were 2 other features which Jianhui was working on. I don't really have a real picture of their importance and their status as of now. Probably Quinton would be the best guy to specify that next week, or this Friday we might have that sync meeting about the app admin use cases again there. That is it. So those 2 were not, those 2 are, one was exposing all the APIs, like providing read access to the APIs. That was one. Some open PRs are there for it.
I think that when we were just discussing that in those Friday meetings, we decided that that wasn't actually something we wanted to do. Or it was something we had to reconsider. Yeah. So yeah, I'm not sure. I think that's moved for now.
Okay. So I mean, as I said, I don't really have a clear update on that. Quinton probably would have the best update on it. What are we going to do about it? Probably
maybe the action item here is for everybody to go back to their orgs, establish whether or not their orgs can live with development or at least merges being discontinued except for critical bugs until we're out of tree. Is that the action item?
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
I think that's good. Yeah.
Yep.
It motivates people to contribute to the effort to move it out of tree, if nothing else.
Yes.
Yeah, and that also comes to a point. I thought that Red Hat also had some interest in this, or I don't know what communication has happened, or because I missed one of the meetings last week or last to last week. So is there somebody who is willing to work on this? I can, probably we can do it together on some of the items can be named for that person. You have some update, Maru?
I think that's me.
Okay, cool.
I've been kind of distracted by some release stuff, but I should be freeing up soon. And obviously I'm available as a resource just for asking questions until I free up. Probably sure. Later this week.
Okay. So if I face some problem, like I am doing in sequentially, I'm at the first item, like figuring out the repo and initial creation of repo and all that. If I'm sort of either complete with that or I face a problem with that, I'll reach out to you.
I can staff somebody looking at kubectl and doing the experiment to rip the linkages to Federation out and seeing how well the generic facilities work to add some data to that part of the discussion.
That would be great.
Okay.
Okay, well, unless anybody else has other items, I think that's all we have today. So is there a plan to try to hold a Friday meeting this Friday?
Good question. I think that we had them scheduled for 4 weeks and the one was canceled. So I guess I'll maybe send it an email and ask if people want to meet again this Friday to make up for that. I think that was kind of the intent behind canceling it, but I don't know, like to some extent, I think the large issues have been discussed, and I don't know, like what do we need 2 hours, a 2-hour block for hashing out? I'm not entirely clear. We have a lot of work just in getting it out of tree and tackling some of those major issues. I think just working on those individually might make more sense than talking about it, but that's just me. I
agree with you. I think the only person missing is Quinton, so I would suggest maybe sending an email about your thoughts and I can chime in.
But our thoughts, it's not just Maru, it's, if you agree, it's ours, right? Yeah, I agree with that too.
Okay. Yeah, I'll send an email with the list and maybe CC Quinn just so we make sure to get it.
Sweet.
Okay.
I had one another issue that I wanted to mention. So I was talking to Janet and she moved the deployments and replica sets and v1 sets to a different group version in core Kubernetes. We have apps v1 beta 2 now. So that's a change which it did in Kube API server, but it didn't make the change for Federation API server didn't make the cut. So in Federation, we won't support the new group version. So I just wanted to mention it to the community, and I'm not sure if we should like put a release note or something that users might expect that like Kubernetes release notes will say that deployments is now part of this new group version, but it won't work with Federation API server.
And does that mean that we can't federate to this version of Cube? Yeah.
Yeah. So if someone gives us a YAML with group version apps v1 beta 2 and runs like kubectl create -f with Federation API server, it won't work. Federation API server will say, I don't know this group version.
So this begs the question, like we're intending to move out a tree and release on a different cadence. Are we still intending to release 1.8 Federation with this breakage, or do we want to actually wait for 1.8 Federation until we move out a tree and we can guarantee compatibility with 1.8 Cube?
Yeah, right now, as part of the normal release process, we would release Federation 1.8. So if we explicitly decide, then we'll need to make changes to the release process.
Right. So I don't know. This is probably a big issue that there's more than 10 minutes or 8 minutes of conversation.
Probably more than this group of people too.
Yeah. So I guess I'm raising the question of whether we do want to try to ask to do something different, or whether we just want to stay the course and we're just breaking compatibility for 1.8. We'll fix in 1.9 or 1.8.1 or I don't know.
Where are we breaking compatibility?
So we are introducing a new group version in Kubernetes, but we are not introducing it in Federation.
So Federation 1.8 will not be able to use all of the underlying Cube API stuff.
Yeah, the new group version. So we'll still support the old one, which is extensions v1 beta 1, which is, I don't think it's deprecated yet. So still that will work with Federation, but the new one.
Oh, so it's just a doc. I say it's just a doc change. Sorry, I thought it was more of a problem.
I can confirm if extensions is deprecated. I don't think it is, but I can verify it.
As long as there's a workaround, I think we're fine.
Yeah, it's just that as a user, the expectation would be like if I see that Kubernetes now supports this new group version, and in Federation we say we support deployments.
Yeah, this feels like a nit and a subtlety in an area that you already have to be pretty expertise to even ask these questions. Do you know what I mean? Like, because like all of the API fitting together pieces are.
Well, we'll have to document it. I think.
Yeah, I think documentation.
Definitely documentation, yes, and I will verify if extensions is deprecated or if it still continues to work.
Okay.
So I take that as action item to verify.
It should still be there because deprecation usually like you keep it around for a release or two, or you're saying they might just remove it immediately.
No, so it's definitely not removed. That I know. It's still exists.
So I think it was deprecated. That's fine as long as it's still there. It should still work.
Yeah. It is there for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. That's it. Going once, twice.
Okay, guys.
Thanks all.
Yep.
Thanks everyone.
See ya.
Bye-bye.